When Russia launched its full-scale invasion, millions of Ukrainians found themselves living under occupation and Russian propaganda. More than 18 months later, many Ukrainians are still looking for ways to escape occupied territories. One way is through enemy land, going into Russia and then entering Ukrainian-controlled areas at the Kolotilovka-Pokrovka crossing in the country's northeast. The humanitarian corridor lies between the Ukrainian Sumy region and the Russian Belgorod region. DW's Aya Ibrahim visited a reception center near the crossing point and spoke with those who fled one side of a war to the other.
They have a long road behind them. When Russia attacked Ukraine in February of last year, they suddenly found themselves under occupation. Now they're back on Ukrainian-controlled land, after a journey that lasted 2 days and 2 nights.
It was scary at their checkpoints. They're Russians, and they do not consider us Ukrainians as human beings. We didn't know what to expect from them. The woman checking passports spoke aggressively to us.
Ella endured a lot under occupation. Her teen son had to flee after Russians beat him up for expressing pro-Ukraine opinions. Her husband could not find treatment for an injury and had to stop working. Then Russian authorities threatened to take her 2 small children away to a boarding school and pressured them to get Russian passports. That's when Ella felt she had to do everything to get away and borrowed money to flee.
We didn't have any money to leave earlier. We're Ukrainians at heart. I've lived here for 40 years. I cannot simply forget that to become a Russian and swear allegiance to them.
Between 50 and 150 people enter Ukrainian-controlled territory through the Kolotilovka-Pokrovka crossing every day. Only Ukrainians are allowed in. If they don't have someone waiting for them, they're brought here. Volunteers give them food, a place to rest, and make a plan. Ukrainian border control also screens arrivals to weed out potential saboteurs. This volunteer tells me that people coming from places like Donetsk, which have been under Russian-sponsored control since 2014, are especially influenced by Putin's propaganda.
They think that we're stupid here, that the Americans are manipulating us, that the war is pure politics. Some think that half of Ukraine simply doesn't exist, that there are ruins, that it's run by Nazis.
But mostly they just need help after leaving almost everything behind. For people leaving occupied territories, this is the last leg of their journey back to their lives. They board trains to Kiev, hoping that whatever's waiting for them there is better than what they've left behind.
The Russians treated us badly. They constantly put pressure on people. They forced people to switch to Russian documents and to work for them.
I want it to end as soon as possible. I want to go home. I want to breathe freely there. What are my plans? We were promised aid with housing. We just don't know. Maybe we'll live somewhere on the floor.
Officials here tell us around 22,000 Ukrainians have fled occupation since the start of the invasion. Even if their first days living under a Ukrainian flag are difficult, authorities hope more and more will make the choice people in this train have made.
Let's speak to our reporter who filed that report. DW's special correspondent, Aya Ibrahim, is just back from Ukraine. She joins me now in the studio. Hi, Aya. You've mentioned there that some of those who are coming to Ukrainian-controlled territory, they've been under the influence of Russian propaganda. And I'm just curious why they come to Ukrainian-controlled territories at all, if that's the case.
It is a minority of people that are coming to Ukrainian-controlled territories. They're typically people who've been living under occupation for a long time. They're, of course, the territories that were occupied at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but there are also people that have been living in separatist-controlled areas since 2014. So there are different levels there. But we know that across the board, Russia and Russian authorities really try to bring people that live there, Ukrainians that live there, under the influence and to really convince them of their propaganda. You know, why people come. Usually it's for economic reasons. We don't really have access to what life is like under occupied territories, but from what people at the center told me, situation is very dire. Some people told me that sometimes they didn't even have enough food, basics like bread, etc. So for a lot of people, especially old people who are living in occupied territories, coming back to relatives in territories under Ukrainian control is the most logical and most practical options. And it can really, cause a lot of tensions within families. I heard of one family where the grandmother was living under occupation, but her grandson was actually fighting for the Ukrainian side. So it's really, you hear really interesting stories of what happens once, people reunite with their families who live, on the other side of the war. But we know, especially speaking to volunteers, that Russian authorities really try to target people in occupied territories, but also people that are living in the border region on the Ukrainian side. There are Telegram channels that, send out messages like, it's the Ukrainians that are striking every time there's a Russian strike and so on. And oftentimes people do believe that, and it is somewhat of a challenge for Ukrainian authorities throughout this war, the propaganda war, the propaganda front that they're having to fight as well.
So for those who do decide to flee to get back to Ukrainian-controlled territory, how hard is it to go logistically? Do Russian authorities just let people go?
Well, there's no guarantee that they'll let them through. There isn't like a Russian official statement saying any Ukrainian who wants to leave from, occupied territories can go to, the place that we were at. But for the most part, it seems that they're letting women through. People that sometimes have issues are young men. These are the ones that people there told me get stopped and really interrogated in these checkpoints and sometimes returned back and told you can't, cross over. And so it's a vague situation, and it is a risk because there's no guarantee that they'll let you through the checkpoints. But the Ukrainian authorities are urging people that can take advantage of that route to do so. It's a humanitarian corridor in the northeast where we were, where also soldier exchanges and so on take place.
Now, are there other routes that Ukrainians can take out of occupation? Why do you think people choose this one in particular?
Yeah, it seems like it would be the more dangerous one because it's going through, Russia proper. But actually, in some cases, that's the most practical and shortest one, even though it takes 2 days and 2 nights with a bus, and you have to arrange for, people to drive you and pay them exuberant amounts of money to do so. Of course, there are other ways. People can't just directly go west because then they would go through the front line, and that is really, really dangerous. Some people do go through that. Of course, there's an option to go through Belarus and then enter through European countries like Poland and then back into Ukrainian-controlled territories. But that is often not an option for people who have no documentation. I mean, after living under occupation, their Ukrainian documents may have been lost. But at this particular crossing, people can come with as little as a birth certificate. And volunteers told me of a man who, got identified through a speeding ticket that he had in, in a Ukrainian database. So it is dangerous, but somehow in this very messed up and difficult situation is perhaps the most practical for some people.
Well, thank you so much for your reporting. We really appreciate you bringing us up to speed. That is DW Special Correspondent Aya Ibrahim.